Mar says, Master Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon said, so what did Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon told us that the only offerings. Rabbi Shimon told us, and so we have this long brace of all the different opinions, and Rabbi Shimon was at the end, and he said that the only offerings that were brought on the bama, on the communal bama, were only Pesach offerings and obligatory offerings that have a set time, like let's say a korban tamid, maybe a daily sacrifice that has a set time. You got to bring it every day, morning, afternoon, so morning and evening. So that are the only ones that were brought on this on these communal bamas. So now that's Rabbi Shimon. My time, what's the reason that the only two things that were brought were paschal offerings and set offerings that had a set time? Why just those two? Because it says the Ksiv, it says in Yoshua, the Yasu b'nei Yisrael, that's a Pesach b'Gilgal. It says that the Jews made a Pesach when they were in Gilgal. Okay, so says Gemara Pshita. Okay, it's like, what's the novelty of that? They made a Pesach at Gilgal. Okay, it was Pesach time. What else should they do? Of course, they follow what they're supposed to do. Ella, how come Ashlan the Chovos kein Pesach the Karev, but Halav came Pesach lo Karev. The pasuk is emphasizing that they brought the Pesach offering when they were in Gilgal to teach you that only those kinds of offerings were brought, and the ones that are not similar to Pesach were not brought. What is Pesach a paradigm for? An offering that has a set time. Offerings that have a communal offering that has a set time, like Pesach, 14th of Nisan, such things are brought. Other ones are not brought. Okay, now what do the other opinions in this brisa do with this verse? The other opinion says, I need this verse for Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Bana. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, Rabbi Bana, Arel Mikabel Hazah. Even someone who's not circumcised, he's called an Arel. He is someone that if he comes in contact with a corpse, he is going to need Hazah. He's going to need a special sprinkling of a para aduma. Now, what do you see from this verse? So Rashi, a little bit of a long Rashi explains that when the pasuk says Vayasu as a Pesach, when they made the Pesach offering, it means they did everything like they're supposed to do. Now, right when they entered into Eretz Yisrael, that's the beginning of Yehoshua. So most of the people didn't have a bris milah. There were a lot of Rashi. There were a lot of people that most people were uncircumcised, and yet it says they did what they're supposed to do to teach you that if they came in contact with a corpse, they became pure. They became pure in order to bring the Pesach offering. They were uncircumcised, so therefore you see that an uncircumcised person still needs the paraduma sprinkling to be purified. Yeah, it's interesting to know why you would think otherwise. Okay. So that's that. Now, Tani Tana Kamei. We forgot our tradition. Oh, tissue boxes. Okay. So Tani Tana Kamei to Rabbi Ada Bar Avo. So this teaching was taught to Rabbi Ada Bar Avo. Or sorry, the following teaching was taught to Rabbi Ada Bar Avo. Ein bein bama gedola lebama katana ela pesach v'chovos hakavul lehem zman. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name. The teaching was taught in front of Rabbi Ada Bar Ava that there's no difference between a big bama, meaning a communal mound where they used to bring sacrifices, and your private one, except for Pesach, v'chovos hakavul lehem zman, the Paschal offering, and the other obligatory offerings that have a set time. So, what's that referring to? Amarle, to targim masnischa, you should interpret your teaching, your brisa, the olas chova. That when it says offerings that have a set time, it's referring to a olas chova, a obligatory ola offering. Why? The ika olas nadava, because the olas chova is that which is brought in the communal offering, and there exists a parallel in the world of olas, in the world of the burnt offerings, by a small mound, which is the voluntary ola offering. So you're telling me that there's no difference between a big mound and a small mound, except for something which has a set time. Those you bring on the big mound. So give me something that has a parallel on the small mound. So Ola is that case. Ola has an obligatory part that has a set time that you bring on the big mounds. Ola Snedava, the voluntary Ola offering, that will be brought in your private mound. Now I'll prove it to you. The ichatos, if it was a chatos offering, a sin offering, and that's what's brought on the big mounds, well, the ichatos yachidhu, chova de kvia leizman, mika. Is there a what kind of chatos? What kind of chatos has a some of the words morning, Steve. Some of the words are a little missing here. It's like this: we're trying to find a difference between the big mound and the small mound. So you want something which that category is brought on the small mound, and another one from that category is brought on the big mound. So in Ola, we have that. An obligatory Ola has a set time. You bring it on the communal mound. A voluntary Ola, you'll bring on the private mound. Okay, that we understand. But a chatas offering, there is an obligatory chatas offering, but there's no voluntary chatas offering. So that's not the right, that can't be the interpretation of this brisa because there's no parallel to a chatas that you would bring on a small mound. We want something which categorically is brought on a small mound, but part of that category can only be brought on the communal mound. That we find by Ola, because there's an obligatory Ola, and there's a voluntary Ola. By a chatas, there's only a obligatory chatas. There's no voluntary chatas. You wouldn't bring a voluntary chatas on your private mound, so that wouldn't be the right interpretation of this brisa. So says the Gemara, okay, but you have other offerings. For example, the lukma b'minchas chova. You can make it an obligatory mincha offering. Why? So why did you have to make it an ola offering? You could have made it a mincha offering also, because the mincha offering, you have a obligatory mincha, and you could have a voluntary mincha offering as well. And the minchas chavitin, the obligatory mincha, is the one that's brought every day by the Kohen Gadol. So you have an obligatory mincha offering and a voluntary mincha offering. So why is your only interpretation of this brisa in Ola, which you found in obligatory Ola and a voluntary Ola? By a mincha, you also have an obligatory mincha and a voluntary mincha. So that we say, this opinion holds, ein mincha b'bama. There was two opinions. Did they bring up flower offerings on these mounds? Some say yes, and some said no. The fact that he interpreted the brisa to be referring to an ola and not a mincha is because he did not bring because he held that they did not bring mincha offerings on the mount. Okay. So now the next part of the Mishnah, that long Mishnah, went through all the different times and the places that that we had these mounds that were permitted. So that Mishnah said that when they got to Shiloh, so the mounds were prohibited. Right? The Mishnah said they got to Gilgal and they were allowed. The mounds were allowed. Then Bowl to Shiloh, and they were the ark got to Shiloh, and the mounds were prohibited. Okay, so now immediately, what's the source of this? Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kosevach Omer. It says in one verse in Shmuel Aleph, V'tiviyeu Beis Hashem Shiloh. The Kosevach Omer Vayitosh Mishkan Shiloh. It says another verse in Tehillim says Vayitosh Mishkan Shiloh Ohel Shikein Ba'adam Uksiv Vayimas Ba'ohel Yosef Ubeshevet Ephraim Lo Bachar. So. Okay. Yeah, so really, we're not really asking about the fact that it was permissible, the Bamas. We're asking about another part of that tabernacle in Shiloh. The Mishnah said that when they had their tabernacle there, the roof, there was no roof. There was just a little bit of stones on the bottom and a curtain on top. So now we're asking, how do you know that that's true? So on the one hand, it says, let's say with Beis Hashem Shiloh, that they got to Shiloh, okay. And it says there the verse calls it a tent. It was a tent. Writing that verse in. Beis Hashem Shiloh. Yeah, and then the next verse there says Vayitosh Mishkan Shiloh, that they made the Mishkan Shiloh. So that was the tent, and then it says so that I think that's the source. It was a tent and it wasn't a building. So fine. Now the Kosuv Echad Omer. One second, sorry. Yeah, one more time. It says in one verse, "Vativeu Beis Hashem Shiloh." They brought the Beis Hashem to Shiloh, and another verse says, "Vayitosh Mishkan Shiloh." And Mishkan Shiloh, there was a tent there. That the Shiloh was a tent. It says the end of the verse, "Ohel Shikein Ba'adam." It refers to the tabernacle in Shiloh as a tent. So you see, it was a tent. Okay. Now another verse says, "Uksiv Vayimas Ba'ohel Yosef Uvasher Ephraim Lo Bachar." The verse in Tehillim seemed to imply that the tabernacle of Shiloh was in the section of Ephraim, under Yosef's section, not in Binyamin's section. So, unless I'm jumping, 1 second. One second. Yeah, okay, like this. The first verse calls it a house of Hashem. The second verse calls it a tent. So which one was it? Was it a house, which implies a structure? Was it a tent, which implies it was an OL, a tent, which implies it was more more curtain style? Was it like Kessler, or was it outside in the tent? The verses seem to be contradictory. So it says, how could this be? Which one is it referring to? Is it an OL or is it not an OL? Is it a tent or is it not a tent? So the answer is, the way you reconcile the verses is lo haisa sham tikra ela avanim milamatan v'yirius milamalim v'hi haisa menucha. The way you reconcile it is that the bottom there were stones, so that's more of a stability like a house. The top didn't have a roof, rather it had curtains, so that's more like a tent. And that's the menucha. When the Torah says that you'll get to menucha, that's in Devarim, we'll get to menucha. That's what it refers to. It was referring to Shiloh, where you would build this kind of structure, whereas partially, more stable on the bottom and more unstable on the top. Okay. Now, it says there in the Mishnah that when you had this tabernacle, so what happened? It says that the Kache Kadashim, so the very holy sacrifices were eaten only within the curtains. However, the lesser holy, like the Shlomim, let's say, the lesser sanctified offerings and Meiser Sheni could be eaten at any place that you could see Shiloh. As long as you could see Shiloh, so then you could eat the lesser sanctified sacrifices. So now, immediately, how do I know? Oh, so it says in the verse in Devarim that you should be careful, that you should only bring the olas in any place that you could see. It says that any place you could see, so you can't bring it up over there because you're so far away. However, you can eat it. You can eat things in a place that you could see. So that's what the verse says. It says the Gemara, maybe read it differently. Maybe every place that you see you can't bring it up, a sacrifice there. Maybe you could slaughter it there. How do you know it means you can't bring it up, but you could eat? Maybe it's you can't bring it up, but you could slaughter. It's vague. So Amar Rav Yana, Amar Kra, it says now in Devarim, Shamtala v'Shamtasa, that only there, meaning inside, not where you can see, but inside the temple, are you going to bring it up and you're going to do? You're going to do, meaning referring to slaughtering it, which means that the things you can do outside the temple from where you could see it is only referring to eating and not slaughtering, because slaughtering has to be similar to bringing up, and bring up can only be done inside, so slaughtering also is done inside. He says a different verse. He says the pasuk says, turn the page. It says, "Velo Tana Shiloh." So in Yeshua, it says, Velo Tanash Shilo. Now, what exactly does it mean? Velo Tanash Shilo. So it's a makom shekol haroa also mitaneach alav. Alachilas kachim shalom. It means everybody would groan. It would be a place where people would see it and they would groan. Why would they groan? Because it was a place where they used to be able to eat. When they were able to see Shiloh, they were able to eat their sacrifice. Now that it's no longer there, they would groan about it. So below Tanakh Shiloh would be the place that everyone could see. There they would groan about because they no longer could eat their sacrifice there because it wasn't there anymore. Yeah. Now Rashi points out these actually three words is not. There's no verse that has these three words in it, but Rashi did find a verse in Yoshua that used these words, and the word Tanas actually refers to like a boat, things that you would take a boat and look from a distance, and homiletically it means also to groan. That's the Gemara saying, a place where you could go and you would look. So from that place you would groan. So in the place that you used to be able to see Shiloh, you would groan about that now because you no longer could eat your sacrifices there. Okay. Another verse. Rabbi Abo, Amar Amar Krab ben Prat Yosef ben Prat Ali Ayin. We had 2 weeks ago the bracha for Yosef. So that he's going to be blessed. He's going to be blessed with Ali Ayin, with this something to do with an eye. Let's see what it means. So first, Ben Parat Yosef is going to have is a language Rashi says of being fruitful and multiply. So let's see how the Gemara learns it here. So it means ayin shelo ratzta lazam v'lahana midavar she'eno shelo. So it means that eye that didn't want to benefit from looking at something which he's not supposed to look at, meaning the wife of Potiphar. So he'll be zoche, he'll merit and eat to as much as his eye can see. The one whose eye didn't look at something and benefit from something that doesn't belong to him, that person will merit that they'll be able to eat. They'll be able to eat from things by seeing. What that referring? That's referring to going to be Mishkan Shiloh, the tabernacle in Shiloh. That there you'll be able to eat as far as the eye can see Shiloh. You'll be able to eat. And Rashi points out, we're going to see this more, is that the tabernacle of Shiloh was in the section of Yosef. We'll see specifically in Ephraim's section. It's clear in Tehillim like that. We're gonna have a contradiction soon, but they put the tabernacle of Shiloh in the section of Yosef, and they allowed you to eat for as long as you could see that tabernacle. That was the blessing of Yosef. That was your eye, who you were careful with your eyes. So such an eye, so people will now be able to see the tabernacle and benefit from eating the sacrifice. Another verse, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Amar Raton Shokne Sna Ayin. So this is referring to in Devarim. It says there, Uritzon Shochne Sna. So this is also referring to Yosef, I believe. Yeah. What does it mean? Uritzon Shochne Sna. The Gemara says, Ayin Shelo Ratz Lehanos Midavar Sheino Shelo Tischa V'Tochal Bein Hasinuin. The eye, meaning you're going to dwell, literally, Ritzon Shokei Stan. The one who had the Ratzon will be dwelling in the bush, like a burning bush, the snap. But it means, the Gemara learns, it means you're going to, the Ratzon, the one that didn't have a desire to look at what doesn't belong to him, he'll be merit and eat Ben Hasnuin, I guess, among the ones that hate him. What does they hate him? It means that tabernacle is in the middle of the other tribes. You'll be able to eat it even in the borders of other tribes. Meaning, even your tabernacle is in the section of Yosef, but you'll be able to eat the sacrifices even in other tribes. Because it's as long as you can see it. You can go to another tribe's territory, and from there you can eat your lesser holy sacrifices. So that's how he understands the verse. Okay. Now, this idea you could see the tabernacle and eat. So what does seeing mean? Seeing means you have potential to see, or you have to actually see. So let's say something's blocking you. There's a building blocking you. like behind where we live, right? They built these apartment buildings that are blocking the Mount Hood view. But can you see Mount Hood? Can you not see Mount Hood? Practically, I can't see Mount Hood. But if they weren't there, then you could see it. So same thing over here. So ask the Gemara, Tana Roish Amru Roa Kulo Below Hamafsik Beino Lebeino. It means that you have to see the whole thing. You have to see the whole tabernacle with nothing interfering between you and the tabernacle. Is that what it means? Amalei Rabbi Shimon ben Eliyah, Shimon ben Eliyah said to Rabbi Lazar, Asavrla. It's Kegon Beik Nishta Dimaon. It's like the it's like the synagogue of Ma'on, which what happened over there. From there, they were able to see Shiloh, and there was no interposition between them, nothing blocking, nothing infringing them seeing from that synagogue to the tabernacle. When they built the new shul where I lived in Israel, in Malatafna, they built a brand new building, and they specifically made it directly corresponding to the Temple Mount. When you climb up the roof, you can see from here. So with nothing blocking. So yeah, exactly. So Amar of Papa Roa Sha'amru Lo Roa Kulo Ela Roa Mitzas. No, he argues you have to see the whole thing to be able to see part of it. Yeah. So Bayer of Papa Omeid Veroa. What if you okay? Yeah. So those things hurt sometimes. Yeah. You have two knees. Okay, good. So I can relate to you. So Bayer of Papa Omeid Veroa. If you stand up, you can see it. But Yoshev Ein Roa Mai. So I think what it means is obviously if you're standing and you can see it, you could eat. But it means if in a place where you sit, you cannot see it. But if you stand, you could see it. Is that permitted or not? So by Rabbi Yirmiyah, Omer Gabe, so that's one question. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, another question. Omer Gabe Nachal Veroa. I think Nachal means a valley, so it's like deep down. So if you're on top of the valley and you can see it, but when you're within the valley, but then you can't see it. How about over there? Yeah, I know what that is. So, ravine, like a valley, no, like over depths. Yeah. So in Israel, all these nachal this, nachal that always means you're going down to the. So, Maya, what's the answer? Oh, yeah, no, take it. What is that? Right. Yeah. The lights by Vermont. Exactly. So, on birthday. Okay. So now, this idea now that the tabernacle was in Yosef's portion. Usually the Shekhinah dwelt in Binyamin's portion, not in Yosef's portion. Well, let's see how that's going to work out. Kiyasar of Dimi. Okay, by 9:32. Okay, so let's see. Kiyasar of Dimi. Kiyasar one of Dimi came from right Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. He said, Amar Rabbi, B'shloshim Makomos in three places. Sharsha Shekhinah Yisrael. In three places, the Shekhinah rested on the Jewish people. B'Shilo, one. V'Nov v'Givon, and in the place of Nov and Givon, we count that as one in those two places. U'Beis Olamim, and the Beis Olamim is referring to the temple. U'Bekulan lo shars halo b'chelik Binyamin. It was always in the portion of Binyamin. We had earlier, right? Earlier in the Masechta we had about exactly where the Mizbeach was, a little Binyamin, but even Yehuda got a small portion of it. It was in Binyamin. It was destined for Binyamin. Shenamra, how do I know? So the verse that blesses Binyamin, it says, "The Binyamin Amar Yedid Hashem Yishkol Avetach Olav Chofei V'Lav." It's going to be Hashem's going to dwell eternally with Binyamin, and it's going to be Chofei V'Lav. It's going to be hovering upon him. So hovering upon him Kol Hayom, the whole day, the entire day, and between the shoulders he's going to dwell. Okay, so now. You see, it's going to dwell in Binyamin's portion. Kol chafifos lo yiyu ela b'chal Binyamin. All the dwellings, the hoverings of the Shekhinah is going to be on the portion of Binyamin. So how could you tell me that Yosef, he got a reward for guarding his eyes and not getting benefit that the Shekhinah dwelled with him? We see it's only in the portion of Binyamin. So Yosef's portions were a prime and Menashe. He divided into two. So now. Ki Azil Abaye Amri Kamei Rav Yosef. When Abaye went, he said his teaching to Rav Yosef, and he got it over the head. Amar Chad Bra Havele the Kollel Velo Miskan. He said He said, I had one. Okay, it's not. Abai was an orphan. His father died when his mother was pregnant. So Rabbi Yosef is saying there was one son to Kailil. That's Rashi says that seems to be Abai's father's name. So the trivia question for Abai is everywhere. We don't know his father usually. He calls one of the other Rebbeim his father because he was an orphan. So I think his mother also died when she gave birth to him, I think. So either way, Rabbi Yosef tells him this Kyle had one son below Miskan, and he's not really Miskan means like fixed up, meaning he does not learn. He's saying things that are incorrect. Below Miskan, he's not put together. So he says you're bringing me a question that from Rav Dimi that all the dwellings were in the portion of Binyamin. I'll show you not that way. The Haksiv, it says in Tehillim, Vayitosh Mishkan Shiloh. It says that they planted the tabernacle of Shiloh, and then this is in the 78th Psalm, in the 60th verse over there. But you go a few verses later, and it talks about the Jews in Shiloh. It says, "Vayimas ba'ohal Yosef v'shevet Ephraim lo-bachar." They despised the tabernacle of Yosef, and they didn't choose the tribe of Ephraim, implying that the tabernacle was in the tribe of Ephraim, and they despised that. But you see that really it was in the place of Ephraim, not the place of Yosef. So he's telling him, listen, you have one son, and like Tehillim, he doesn't know Tehillim. So now Amr of Ada, I don't understand the whole problem over here. He's trying to defend Abai. Like, what was Abai saying? Ma'ika Kashule, Dilma Shchina, Bechelek Binyamin, B'Sanhedrin Dola, Bechelek Yosef. It's not hard. We're going to find now. We find in the temple that there was divided up. The Shechina was in one section, and the great court, the Sanhedrin, was in another section. That was in the portion of Yehuda, and the Shechina, where the altar was, where the holy area was in the section of Binyamin. So you had this division. Yehuda had the great court. Binyamin had the divine presence. So the same thing was in Shiloh, and that's going to answer the verses. One part was Yosef. That was Binyamin. That was where the Shekhinah was. You found me verses that talk about things being in Shiloh. And it's referring to Ephraim, meaning Yosef's section. That was the court. The court was in Yosef's section. The Shekhinah was in Binyamin's section, and that's it. So he said, no, that's very different. Binyamin and Yehuda bordered each other. So that you understand. The Shekhinah was right over here. There's a line dividing. We had a Shekhinah here. And right over here was Yehuda. You had the great court here and the Shekhinah here. But what do you want to tell me? Just like that happened in the temple, so the same thing should happen in the tabernacle in Shiloh. The problem is, though, Binyamin and Ephraim, they don't border each other. So, here they're not next to each other. Says the Gemara, no, they are. He says, Rabbi Chanina says, this is what we had way earlier about the tabernacle, the part of the tabernacle that was sectioned off for Yehuda. So it entered into Binyamin's section, and that's where the tabernacle was built. And that's what Binyamin was so distraught about, that part of the section of the tabernacle was given, a small little strip was given over to the section of Yehuda. It says, there's a small section from the portion of Yosef that went into the Chelek Shel Binyamin, that it went into the portion of Binyamin, and that's what it means. The verse that we had on the first line of the page is Anas Shiloh, this idea of groaning and groaning over Shiloh. What it meant is that Binyamin was distraught that there was a portion of his that went to the section of Yosef.
Modern day study where we adjusting German, early German.
Okay. So that's that. Now, this idea that was the
Your video and audio froze.
By the way, we lost you.
Arg. Do we text him on WhatsApp?
Sorry, every so often it logs off. It doesn't like what I say, and it just logs right off. Okay, we're back. So it says in the verse
Glad.
blessing to Binyamin that the divine presence, the Shekhinah, is going to dwell upon him. What is that referring to? Zeh Mikdash Rishon. Rabbi, we lost you at 6:35. Now I'm back, Gary. Don't worry. So it says the divine presence rests upon him. That's referring to Zeh Mikdash Rishon. Then it says the whole day. What's the whole day referring to? Interesting. That's referring to Zeh Mikdash Sheni. Uben Seif of Shachin is going to dwell between your shoulders. What does that mean? It's going to referring to the days of the Mashiach, Eli Yemos Mashiach. So that is the first opinion that the divine presence is going to dwell through the two temples. Now, Rebbe says, Chol faith alav, Zeh ha'olam hazeh. Dwelling upon you is referring to this world. It's always going to be in the section of Binyamin, in this world. Always. Meaning, even in Shiloh, I believe. That's that. Zeh ha'olam hazeh. Kol hayom, the whole day is Yemos Mashiach. Umbeng seif of Shachin, between your shoulders, it'll dwell between your shoulders. That's referring to Olam Haba. But you see that if it's going to dwell always by you in this world, that means it's not going to dwell in the portion of Ephraim. So the other opinion who didn't say that said that it's only going to dwell in the portion of Binyamin for the first two temples. But it didn't say it's going to be there for Shiloh. Rebbe said it's going to be there the entire this world, the whole Olam Hazeh, wherever it's going to be in the portion of Binyamin. So if you say it's going to be the whole this world will be in a portion of Binyamin, it means even during the time of Shiloh. If you say that's only going to be in the first two temples, so then that's only going to be in the two temples, but not necessarily, but not during the when the tabernacle was in Shiloh. Okay, now we're going to do some mathematics and not feel too bad that we don't know Tanakh. Okay, so Tana Rabbanim Yomei Ohel Moed Sheba Midbar Arba'im Shana. So the first one is actually from Chumash, that the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. By the way, commentaries point out that just at the tent of meeting was the place where you met the divine presence. Every holiday is called a moed because it's a special meeting between you and Hashem. Pesach had his unique meeting of freedom, and Shavuot has his about Torah, and Sukkot has its. Anyways, okay. Yemei al hamoed shebeibar arba'im shana chaser achas. Interesting. Sometimes we refer to 40 minus 1. The 39 prohibitions on Shabbos is 40 minus 1. The 39 lashes, 40 minus 1. One time we did lunch and learn by Steve about this comparison between the two, I think. Okay, so either way, it was so this also interesting the way it phrased it is it dwelled in the midbar 40 minus 1. So our Bayim Chaser Acha. Now, you may ohel moed shebe Gilgal, when it was in Gilgal, it was 14 years. Arba Esrei. That was the beginning of their entering into Israel. So Shiva Shekavshu, 7 of the years were conquering Israel. The 7 Shechilku. And 7 of the years was dividing it up. So in those 14 years, you had a tent of meeting in Gilgal. Fine. Yemei ohel. We're going to go through each one of these things and prove how we know this. Yemei ohel moed shebeno begivon chamishim v'sheva. It was in Nov and Givon for 57 years, which leaves you nishtayru l'shilo shlosh meos v'shivim chasrakas, which is 370 minus 1, which is 369. So that's the tent of meeting, and those are the places and the years that it was. So now, Yomei ohel moed midbar, that it was in the desert. How do I know it was 40 years minus 139 years? Arba'im chasarachas. We know, how do I know? Damar Shana Rishona, the first year of the desert, Asa Moshe as the Mishkan. He built the Mishkan. Shmiya, but the second year, Hukam HaMishkan. The second year, it was actually erected in the second year. And then Vishalach Moshe Meraglim, and then Moshe sent the Meraglim, sent the spies. So we're in the desert for 40 years, and the tabernacle was only erected in year 2. That gets you 39 years having the tabernacle in the desert. Now, Shebe Gilgal Arbasre, how do I know? It was 14 because it was 7 years. Sheva Shekifshu, Sheva Shechilku, Minoah. How do you know that it took 7 years to conquer and 7 years to divide up the land? So now, here's a little more nitty gritty, so you're gonna have to help me. So it says like this: the Amar Kollel, that Kollel said, Ben Arba'im Shana Anochi B'Shlach Moshe Eved Hashem Osi. Mikadosh Barnea L'Ragelas Ar. I was, Kollel says, one of the 12 people that was sent. So he says that that I was 40 years old when Moshe sent me, which means that the second year of the Jews in the desert, he was 40 years old, which means for the next 38 years he was in the desert. Year 2, he sent the Meraglim, so he's going to be 78 years old entering into Israel. So, Va'ashuv Oso Davar Kasher Im Levavi, and I brought back words with my heart back to Moshe. I reported back to him. Fine, that's that. Now it says that he entered into Israel at 78 years old. And today I'm 85. Ki Avre Liyarden. So now I'm going to be I'm 85 now, crossing the Yarden. So Bar Kama Have Bar Shivim Matamni. He was 78 years old when he crossed, and finally they for 7 years the Kamer Ben Chamish Shana. So Hare Sheva Shekavshu. Finally, 7 years of conquering Israel. Finally crossed the Yarden. He was 78 plus 7, 85 year 85 years old. Yeah. Okay, so now that's 7 years of conquering, 7 years of divvying out. How do I know that they divvied it out in 7 years? So now, so 7 years they conquered, and 7 years they must have also divided it up. So I was bothered by this, like, why? Maybe 7 years they conquered, and 1 year they divided up. Then I saw that because this was also bothered by this. I found that they said in the footnote, he also was bothered with this assumption. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. Some of the Gemara knows that that's what it was. So that's one answer. And now, like a very long Rashi to explain the next answer. We'll see if we get it right. Okay, so we're going to have, I'm just going to get this right, a prophecy in Yecheskel talking about that happened 14 years after the temple was destroyed. So it says, so 14 years after the city, the temple was destroyed, he had the beginning of these prophetic visions of what's going to happen in the third temple. So basically, Rashi goes through a long calculation of that when he was talking, it was Yovel. It was a Yovel year. Because the verses there imply it was a Rosh Hashanah. It was Rosh Hashanah on the 10th of the month. What Rosh Hashanah do you have on the 10th of the month? It must be a Rosh Hashanah for the slaves that go back to their owners and the fields that go back. It was the beginning of a year. So it was the Yovel year. Now the calculation is that when the Jews, so now basically we're either going to calculate 850 years. It's going to be the total from leaving Egypt to the destruction of the temple, because it was erected 480 years after, and it stood for 410 years. So 480 years later it was erected, and then how do you get to 850? Good.
Wilderness for 40 years. Temple was built 440 years.
Fine, that's fine. That's 480. But then it was destroyed.
Temple was stood for 410 years. So 440 plus
850, good. So 440 plus meaning because we left Egypt. Good. We left Egypt and 40 years in the desert. Good. So 440 years after being in the desert, meaning after entering Israel, 440 years later, the temple was erected, and it's still for 410 years, 850. Now, Yechezkel is speaking. He's speaking on a Yovel year. So the question is he speaking 850 years after we entered into Israel? If that would be true, so then, or is he speaking 836 years after? Meaning, the only way to get to the fact that he's speaking on a Yovel year is if you start calculating 14 years after they entered Israel. So if you start 14 years later, so we're talking now 850 minus 14, 836 years later, he's speaking on a Yovel year and telling you that 14 years earlier, the temple was destroyed. So, but the only way to get to that calculation is if you start calculating 14 years after we get into Eretz Yisrael, because if not, so then he wouldn't be speaking on a Yovel year. The only way to get him speaking on a Yovel year and saying that 14 years earlier the temple was destroyed was if you start calculating 14 years after we entered into Israel. If you start calculating like that, so that shows you that after 7 years of conquering, it was 7 more years of dividing, and then 836 years later, he's now speaking on a Yovel year, telling you that 14 years earlier, so 36 years into that Yovel cycle, 14 years before the next Yovel cycle, because there were 17 Yovels between one period to another period. He's speaking 17 Yovels later. So that's only going to work if you start calculating 14 years after the Jews entered 14 years after they entered Eretz Yisrael. So 7 years we know they conquered. So it must be 7 more years of divvying it out, and therefore the calculation is going to make sense. Okay? The world's up to what today? 190? Menachos today?